So this month, we are talking about a theme called giant gentleness, which is a little bit of a weird phrase to me anyway. So when I was thinking about what this might mean and how to make sense of it and then how to talk with you all about it, I was thinking about this idea of what does gentleness mean, right? So we often think of gentleness as a kind of softness, right? It's a kind of soft way of being in the world. And actually I found a definition of gentleness that defined it as a strong hand with a soft touch, which I really liked because it was that blend of both strength and softness. So this month, part of what we are exploring is the role of gentleness in our lives, how it can be part of learning how to love ourselves in a more effective and holistic way, how it can be part of learning how to love others, and ultimately, as we will share, I think part of how we really learn to love God or the divine or however we envision and name it, but that's something greater than we are. So there are moments, I wonder if any of you have ever had them, when you have a kind of sense of your just connection and oneness with everybody. Has anybody ever had a moment like that? Yeah, a few of us have had that. And in that moment, there's this sort of sense of all-encompassing love, right? You're just lifted up by it, enriched by it. And then other moments, we don't really feel that so easily, right? We're feeling kind of disconnected. We're feeling alone or lonely or separated. And in those moments, we can find connection through gentleness and compassion. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. The power of gentleness is that it really helps us to connect with who we are and who we want to be. And it allows us to create the space for moments in our lives, in fact, hopefully many, many moments, to feel sacred and holy as we connect with that infinite divine essence within us and within each other, and indeed within all of creation and the universe. So last week, Reverend Suzette started this journey with all of you, talking about this idea of loving ourselves and the role of gentleness and loving ourselves. And this week, we're going to talk about the role of love and gentleness in loving, each other, or what I'm going to call neighbor love. I learned recently that whales are among the species which, at least animal scientists believe, make friends, right? So animals live with each other and have companionship clearly and take care of each other. But in the way that we think about friendship and connection, whales are some of the other creatures that form friendship along the same way. And indeed, apparently, beluga whales do this with whales who are not related to them. So they form these connections with other whales, which I thought was really wonderful. So here are our sort of spirit animals for the day, beluga whales, who I have encountered as animals in the past with a great sense of humor. So I also relate to them from that standpoint. And then next week we're going to talk, Reverend Jerry, Reverend Suzette's going to talk about the role of love and gentleness in community. And then finally, at the end of the month, Reverend Jerry is going to go over how we celebrate that collective love together. So that's just a little forecast. So people are really wonderful when they're kind, aren't they? When they're nice, when they're cooperative, when they do what we want them to do. Don't we love people then? It's wonderful. And then sometimes they're not so nice. Sometimes they're kind of fickle or opinionated or judgmental. Oh my gosh. And that's when everything kind of goes wrong, isn't it? What is the matter with them? I'm perfectly fine. They're the ones who are behaving in this perfectly irrational, crazy way, right? When things don't go right, it is our very natural human tendency to want to blame other people, right? Because our judgments kind of get in the way. So what is our opportunity in that moment? Well, if we can begin by applying some gentleness to ourselves And then, by applying some gentleness to our interactions with others, we may find that we're able to let them be themselves and ourselves be ourselves. And in that space, right, of love for ourselves and love for others, we can begin to really connect in a meaningful way. So Ernest Holmes, in our Declaration of Principles, says, we believe in the individualization of the spirit in us, and that all people are individualizations of the one spirit. And this is really that idea we often talk about in the metaphor of the ocean, right? As if the divine were an ocean, we would all be drops of the ocean. We are not the vastness of the divine, but we are, in our individual drops, all that the divine is, right? We are the energy of creation in all of its myriad forms. And that means each and every one of us is sacred and holy. And the other person, place, or thing is none other than the expression of love. Just as we are each the expression of love, so is everything else. And what that means, fundamentally and ultimately, is that no one and nothing is either for us or against us. It just is. Right? It just is. And we can take some comfort sometimes in not feeling like everything is against us. We are all here existing in that same very powerful reality. So what is our challenge in this? Well, Ernest Holmes frames it this way. None of us is as perfect in expression as we ought to be. Oh, darn. Darn. None of us is as perfect as we ought to be, or that we can be, right? So the challenge to each of us is to be great enough to rise in love, in charity, through understanding and compassion. And I'm really sorry to break it to you, but this is that thing we run up against in spiritual teaching all the time. There's work. Oh man, I know you didn't come here this morning to hear about your work. So I'm sorry to disappoint you from that standpoint. But the good news about this work is that it is a pathway to greater joy. And so I think it is work that is profoundly and deeply worthwhile. And I want to invite you to really embrace that idea and see where it takes you. See where that adventure goes. As Sylvia said, those detours, those byways, they might take you somewhere even more wonderful. So I affirm that, and I want to invite you indeed to do the same thing. So because we affirm in our teaching, right, that our thinking really defines what we experience, right, which is why we use that phrase, change your thinking, change your life, right, because when we change our thinking, everything changes around us because we have changed our thought. And what that means is that our relationships in any given moment are a mirror of our ideas and our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about the world around us, our beliefs about others. Our beliefs manifest in our relationships. I really love this phrase that I came across. The only place from which you can interact with others looks just like you. Now, do you feel that way? I often feel like, well, no, that's not me. I'm not like that. And yet. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that anything you perceive as negative is your fault, right? Whatever people say or do is theirs. And the thing that we have power over is how we respond to that. But this is a bigger picture idea, that what we start out with in our beliefs about who we are and who everybody else is tends to manifest itself in alignment with those beliefs. So if we're having an experience in a more general way or a more consistent way that we don't like very much, we have some options. We can start changing the way that we think. And part of that is to start, as Reverend Suzette talked about last week, is to think about yourself in a different way. I wonder how many people ever had an experience, whether it was in childhood or young adulthood, where they came to a kind of negative conclusion about themselves or their capabilities? Yeah, a lot of us have had that. And part of the challenge of that is that holding on to that idea, we keep recreating aspects or elements of that belief in our experience. So part of that loving yourself is loving that negative conclusion away, right? Simply allowing yourself to know that you are indeed love embodied, that that experience, that conclusion, that belief does not define you, that you have the opportunity to release that and know a greater wholeness and a greater version of yourself. And side note advertisement, if you're having problems with that release, that's what our practitioners and ministers are here for. So please feel welcome to bring those kinds of struggles to us, because we want you to know your greater wholeness, your greater love ability. So don't bother beating yourself up for any previous negative relationship or mistake. The point is to start here and right now in thinking about yourself and those things in new ways. So the Dalai Lama shares with us, the more that we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. Cultivating a close, warm-hearted feeling for others automatically puts the mind at ease. This helps remove whatever fears or insecurities we may have and gives us the strength to cope with any obstacles we encounter. It is the ultimate source of success in life. That's a very powerful statement, isn't it? The ultimate source of success in life. So here in this statement, the Dalai Lama proclaims, right, and affirms the importance of compassion as a key element of living a life of happiness, right? So that, and we understand that compassion is a virtue, right? And he's defining compassion here as a close, warm-hearted feeling. Compassion is a virtue, but is not only a virtue, it is a means, it is a path. Sylvia talked about love as a goal. I'm also going to suggest we can think about love in this form of compassion as the tool, as the toolbox, as both the way and where you're going, right? So it has multiple dimensions. So when we apply compassion to ourselves, while we may not like what we did or said, we can really begin to comprehend that making mistakes is part of being human. An act of compassion for others also helps us remember that they are human too, right? Whatever their challenges or shortcomings may be. And this doesn't mean that they get free rein to treat you however they might want to, but it also doesn't mean that you have to understand everything about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Every person everywhere has some kind of untold story, right? They've lived through traumas, they've had their own tragedies, and they've created a way to live and function based on that history, just as each and every one of us has done. Ernest Holmes says, compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the attempt to discover the divinity in each other. It is the most gentle of all human virtues. So we're back to that word of gentleness, and remember that's both strength and softness at the same time. So active compassion usually requires focus and intention, right? When your intention is to let the people in your life be themselves and to love them for who they are, then you are gentle with these reminders to yourself. So I came across a story recently that really moved me. And it was about a young man named Mark, who was walking home from school one day. And as he walked along, he saw that a boy ahead of him had dropped his backpack and all the books he was carrying and 2 sweaters and a baseball hat and a glove and a tape recorder. This is obviously an old story because who has a tape recorder now? But, imagine whatever else it might be. And he knelt and helped the boy pick up all the things. and helped him as they walked along because he had so much stuff. And as they walked along, he discovered that the boy's name was Bill and that he loved video games and baseball and history, and he was really failing at all of his other subjects. And they arrived at Bill's home first, and Bill invited Mark to come in and have a Coke and watch some TV. And so they hung out for the afternoon, had some laughs, talked, and then Mark went home. And they continued to see each other around school, had lunch together once in a while, and both graduated eventually from junior high school. That's how old they were. Went on to high school. Again, would see each other from time to time. Finally, they were in their senior year, and one day Bill came to Mark and he asked if they could talk. And Bill reminded Mark of that day, so many years before, when Mark had helped him pick up all the stuff that he had. He said, "Did you ever wonder why I was carrying so many things that day?" And he said, "You see, I had cleaned out my locker because I didn't want to leave a mess for anyone. I had stored some of my mom's sleeping pills, and I was going to commit suicide." And then Bill told Mark that he realized that after spending time with Mark that afternoon, spending time with someone who was willing to just sit with him and hang out and talk with him and laugh, he said, "I would have missed that time with you and many other good times in my life that followed. What I'm trying to say is that you did a lot more when you picked up those books for me than just help me with that." He said, "You saved my life." And I think that really resonated for me when I heard this story was how many times in my own life someone's kind word, someone's smile, someone's brief sharing had lifted me up when I couldn't see the good in myself, couldn't see the good in the situation around me, and how often and how easy it is for us to do that for others. And Mark didn't need to know all of Bill's story. He didn't need to know all the things that were hard. He didn't have to fix it. He didn't have to organize it. All that he had to do was be present and accept Bill as a human being. And that really does embody the idea to me of gentleness, right? Of strength and softness together. The willingness to be present and just be. Ernest Holmes says, "When we let the love that is within us go out to the God who is in all people, then we are loving God with all our heart and with all our soul and mind, because we are recognizing that the spirit within us is the same spirit we meet in others. This is loving our neighbors as ourselves." Some of you may be familiar with the passage in Matthew in the Bible where it says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Now this is slightly flipped, right? Ernest Holmes kind of started in the other direction. He said, when you love your neighbor, then you learn how to love God. And one thing that I wanted to share with you as I was going over I was kind of contemplating these passages was was a quote or a passage from a sermon by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. that I came across at the beginning of my ministerial training. And part of what we're asked to do in our ministerial training for speaking with all of you is to learn passages of different things that are inspiring to us that we would like to share with other people. So Reverend King wrote a sermon called "The Three Dimensions of a Complete Life." And in it he stated this: go out this morning, love yourself, and that means rational and healthy self-interest. You are commanded to do that. That is the length of life. Then follow that. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. You are commanded to do that. That is the breadth of life. And there's a first and even greater commandment. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, and all thy strength. And that is the height of life. And when you got that, when you get all three of these together, you can walk and never get weary. You can look up and see the morning stars singing together and the sons of God shouting for joy. When you get all three of these working together in your very life, judgment will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I have carried that passage with me in my journey. It's something I have up by my desk at home and at my desk at the hospital. Because for me, it is the expression of sort of what it is that we are and why it is that we are here. We are made of love. We are expressions of love. It is our purpose to love. And when we love ourselves and each other, we love God. We love the allness that we already are. It's kind of the perfect circle. So I want to invite you to do a very brief compassion practice with me this morning. I want you to imagine in your mind a friend or acquaintance. I want you to hold that person in your mind and send them your love. Let the love pour from you and reach this person's life in every way. See this person swaddled in love, enfolded in love. Observe their body glowing with love. Know that this love supports them in every decision and action. Feel the love that shines forth from them. So now, I want to invite you later in the day or this evening or tomorrow, sometime this week. That's because we always talk about homework, right? I want to invite you to do this exercise with someone that you don't like very much, or someone who you find kind of difficult to interact with, right? And don't worry if it doesn't feel very comfortable, because that's totally natural, right? I just invite you to do it, to start where you are, as Buddhist nun Pema Chodron says. We just start where we are. And this week, if you have the time and the inclination, just each day, pick someone to do this with. Someone you love, someone you don't love, a stranger you see on the street, doesn't matter. And just see how you feel at the end of the week. So recognizing our oneness with each other gives us insight and awareness of our own judgments and how that's reflected in our relationships. Loving ourselves leads to loving others, and loving others is loving ourselves and loving God. Reaching for the outpouring of divine givingness, as Ernest Holmes phrased it, is a form of active compassion that allows our beloveds to be themselves. And it also gives us the space we need to find our own balance and perspective. So all relationships ultimately are sacred and holy. And this gentleness, this compassion in how we see people around us is part of what helps to support that sacred and holy awareness, to create that container. So let's continue to keep this gentleness practice going, to keep it growing, to keep it going, to spread it and share it through our own love all around the world. So I want to just invite you to join me. Another real life example of friendship in the animal world, right? Not just within species, but between them. Yeah. So I just want you to stand up and join me in affirming this statement. We're going to say it softly. We're going to say it with affirmation, and then we're going to proclaim it. All right? So, all of my relationships are love in form. All of my relationships are love in form. All of my relationships are love in form. Thank you. No. And now, another wonderful song from Joe Rathburn.